The rain in Chicago doesn't wash away sins, it just makes the streets slick enough for a faster getaway. Chloe learned that the hard way when she found her fiancé's hand halfway up his assistant's skirt in a dimly lit VIP booth. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her $18 martini. Instead, she turned to the imposing, dead-eyed stranger sitting alone at the bar, grabbed his lapels, and kissed him. She just wanted 30 seconds of revenge. She got the head of the Cosa Nostra. The Cobalt Room smelled of expensive gin, melted wax, and desperation dressed up as exclusivity. Chloe hated it here. She hated the velvet walls, she hated the jazz trio playing just a fraction too loud, and she really hated that she was wearing heels that pinched her toes just to celebrate Derek's promotion. She clutched a small, leather-wrapped box in her left hand, a vintage Patek Philippe. It had cost her 3 months of commissions, but Derek had been dropping hints for a year. She navigated the crowded floor, sidestepping finance bros in matching blue suits and women laughing with their heads thrown back. Derek had texted her to meet him at the back booths. "Got a surprise for us, babe." The message had read. She rounded the corner of a heavy mahogany pillar. The surprise was certainly there. Derek wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at Sarah. Sarah, who was ostensibly his junior analyst, but who was currently pressed against the leather banquette, her legs tangled with his. Derek's hand was shoved unceremoniously beneath the hem of her silk skirt. His mouth was on her neck. He looked hungry, sloppy, and entirely at ease. Chloe stopped. The floor seemed to drop 3 inches. Her brain didn't process the scene with fireworks or shattering glass. It processed it with a sudden absolute stillness. The ambient noise of the bar dialed down to a low, rushing hum. Her hands went ice cold. She looked at the ring on her left finger. 2 carats. Radiant cut. He had proposed 6 months ago. A sharp, cynical voice in her head whispered, "Well, you always said he was ambitious." She didn't cry. Chloe hadn't cried in public since she was 7 years old, and she wasn't about to start for a man who wore too much cologne. But a hot, ugly coil of humiliation tightened in her chest. She wanted to hurt him. She wanted to take a crowbar to his carefully constructed ego. Screaming wouldn't do it. Throwing a drink would just make her the crazy ex-fiancé in front of his colleagues. She needed to take his power. She pivoted on her heel, her gaze sweeping the bar area. The stools were packed, a sea of irrelevant faces. Except for one. He sat at the far end of the curved marble bar. He was the only person in the room not trying to be seen. A perimeter of empty space surrounded him, an invisible barrier that the drunken crowd instinctively refused to cross. He wasn't doing anything intimidating. He was just nursing a glass of amber liquid, staring straight ahead. He wore a dark suit, tailored with a precision that bordered on aggressive. His profile was sharp, harsh angles and shadows, with jawline tension that suggested he spent his life waiting for something to go wrong. Chloe didn't think. If she thought, she would have noticed the 2 enormous men in unassuming grey suits standing exactly 6 feet behind him. She would have noticed the bartender sweating as he wiped the counter near him. She walked over. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile. He didn't turn his head, but she saw his shoulders shift infinitesimally. He knew she was there. Chloe didn't introduce herself. She didn't hesitate. She stepped into his space, dropping the Patek Philippe box onto the bar with a dull thud. She grabbed the lapels of his suit. The wool was unbelievably soft, and hauled herself up on her tiptoes. She kissed him. It was meant to be a performance. A loud, undeniable statement for Derek, who she could see from the corner of her eye had finally looked up from his junior analyst. But the second Chloe's lips met the stranger's, the performance collapsed. His mouth was firm, tasting of smoke, peat, and expensive scotch. For a fraction of a second he was rigid beneath her hands, completely immovable. It felt like grabbing a live wire wrapped in steel. But then, the shock faded, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. He didn't pull away. He didn't push her off. A heavy, calloused hand came up, grasping the back of her neck. The grip wasn't gentle. It was possessive. His fingers tangled in the hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. The world tilted with it. What was supposed to be a quick, spiteful peck turned into something bruising and intrusive. He kissed her back with a slow, deliberate authority that sent a shiver straight down her spine. The heat radiating from him was suffocating. He broke the kiss first. He didn't step back. He kept his hand on her neck, his thumb resting against her pulse point. It was beating frantically. He looked down at her. His eyes were a flat, bottomless brown. No warmth, no amusement, just a stark, clinical assessment. "You're shaking," he said. His voice was a low rumble, barely carrying over the jazz music. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine," Chloe breathed, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. She tried to step back, but his grip, while loose, didn't yield. "Chloe, what the hell is this?" Derek's voice cut through the air, high and reedy with sudden panic and indignation. He was storming across the floor, his tie askew, Sarah nowhere to be seen. He looked ridiculous. A boy playing dress-up. The stranger finally let his hand drop from Chloe's neck. He turned his head slowly, looking at Derek the way one might look at a stain on the pavement. The music in the Cobalt room hadn't stopped, but it felt like it had. The silence immediately surrounding them was thick enough to choke on. Derek halted 3 feet away. His face was flushed red, a vein throbbing at his temple. "I asked you a question, Chloe. Who is this?" He pointed a rigid finger at the man beside her. Chloe found her voice. It came out sharper, colder than she expected. "He's an upgrade, Derek. Considering I just found you trying to find the bottom of Sarah's skirt in booth 4. Derek blanched. The indignation faltered for a second before his ego kicked back in. He puffed out his chest, stepping forward to loom over her. "You're crazy. We were having a meeting. You can't just come in here and—" "A meeting?" Chloe interrupted, the cynicism dripping from the words. "Right. Do you normally review quarterly projections with your tongue in her mouth?" People were staring now. The finance bros had stopped laughing. Derek's fists clenched. He shifted his glare to the stranger. "And you, get away from my fiancé before I have you thrown out. I know the owner." The stranger didn't flinch. He didn't shift his weight. He took a slow sip of his scotch, placed the glass back on the marble coaster, and finally looked fully at Derek. "Your fiancé," the man repeated. His voice was incredibly calm. The lack of inflection made it terrifying. "Yes. Now back off." Derek took another step forward. Before Chloe could blink, the space between them vanished. The 2 men in grey suits who had been loitering behind the stranger materialized. They didn't run. They just flowed into position, flanking Derek with brutal efficiency. One of them, a man with a ruined nose and dead eyes, simply placed a hand on Derek's chest. The impact sounded like a slab of meat hitting a butcher's block. Derek stumbled backward, gasping. The wind knocked completely out of his lungs. "Hey, you can't touch me!" Derek wheezed, looking wildly around for the bouncers. The bouncers were currently staring at the ceiling, pretending they were blind. The stranger raised a single finger. The 2 men stepped back, folding their hands in front of them. He approached Derek. He moved with a heavy, predatory grace. When he was standing toe-to-toe with Chloe's ex, he leaned in slightly. "You don't know the owner," the stranger said softly. "The owner pays me rent. Now I'm going to give you advice. Walk out that door. Do not look back. Do not call her. If I see your face in this zip code again, your next quarterly projection will be calculated from a feeding tube. Nod if you understand." Derek was trembling. All the corporate bravado bled out of him, leaving a terrified, pale shell. He looked into the stranger's eyes and saw exactly what Chloe had felt in that kiss. Absolute, uncompromising violence. Derek nodded frantically. He practically tripped over his own feet as he turned and bolted for the exit, not even bothering to look for Sarah. Chloe stood frozen. The adrenaline that had propelled her across the room was crashing, leaving a cold, hollow ache in her stomach. She looked at the man who had just dismantled her life in less than 3 minutes. "Thank you," she managed to say, her throat tight. She reached out, grabbing the leather box containing the watch. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have involved you." She turned to leave, desperate to get out into the cold air, to hail a cab, and finally let herself fall apart in the privacy of her apartment. "Leave it," the voice commanded. Chloe paused, looking back. He was staring at the Patek Philippe box in her hand. "It's mine. I paid for it," she said defensively. "It's tainted by association. Leave it." Before she could argue, he reached out, took the box from her hand with effortless strength, and tossed it to the bartender. "Keep it, Jimmy." Jimmy caught it like it was a live grenade. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti." Moretti. The name rang a faint warning bell in the back of Chloe's mind, buried under years of local news broadcasts, but her brain was too exhausted to make the connection. "Come," Gabriel Moretti said, turning towards the door. "I can get my own cab." Chloe argued, crossing her arms. Gabriel stopped. He didn't look back. "It's pouring rain. You're wearing suede shoes and your hands are shaking so badly you'll drop your phone before you can open an app. I am giving you a ride. Do not make me ask twice." It wasn't an offer. It was a directive. And God help her, Chloe followed him. The Chicago rain was coming down in sheets, turning the city into a blurred canvas of neon and grey. Stepping out of the Cobalt room felt like stepping onto a different planet. A black, armored SUV was idling at the curb. It wasn't alone. Another identical vehicle sat directly behind it. The man with the ruined nose was already standing by the open rear door, an enormous black umbrella held aloft to keep the rain off Gabriel. He didn't offer the same courtesy to Chloe, but Gabriel caught her arm, pulling her under the canopy with him. The heat of his hand seeped through the silk of her blouse. She slid into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich, dark leather, rain, and a faint metallic tang that she couldn't identify. Gabriel slid in beside her. The door clicked shut with the heavy, definitive thud of a bank vault. The driver didn't ask for a destination. The convoy pulled away smoothly, merging into the slick traffic. Chloe sat pressed against the far door, her knees tightly together. The silence in the car was heavy, oppressive. The glass separating them from the driver was thick and opaque. They were completely isolated. She stole a glance at him. Gabriel was staring out the window, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights. In the harsh glare, he looked older, tired, but incredibly sharp. There was no softness to him. "So," Chloe started, hating how small her voice sounded. She cleared her throat. "Gabriel Moretti." He slowly turned his head to look at her. "You didn't know?" "No," she admitted. "I just saw a guy sitting by himself. I didn't realize I was kissing. Well, a monster?" he offered, his tone completely flat. "I was going to say a mobster, but if the shoe fits—" The cynicism slipped out before she could stop it. It was her defense mechanism, and right now she needed a shield. The faintest shadow of a smirk played at the corner of his mouth. It was gone a second later. "Most people would be apologizing right now, or crying." "I don't cry," Chloe said firmly, "and I'm only sorry I ruined a perfectly good watch. You have a name, or should I just call you the menace of Booth 4? Chloe Davis." Gabriel leaned back against the leather seat, steepling his fingers. "Chloe Davis, 28, Commercial real estate broker. You sell overpriced loft spaces to tech startups. You were engaged to Derek Vance, a mid-level acquisitions manager at Sterling Corp, who thinks he's a lot smarter than he actually is. Chloe's breath caught. Her heart hammered against her ribs. How do you know all that? I make it my business to know the landscape of my city, and Sterling Corp has been trying to buy a block of warehouses in the South Loop. Warehouses that belong to me. Derek Vance has been a thorn in my side for 6 months. A very incompetent thorn, but a thorn nonetheless. He looked at her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Which brings me to my next question, Chloe Davis. Did you know who I was, and was this a calculated play? Because if it was, I will have to be very upset with you. The threat wasn't delivered with venom. It was delivered as a simple fact. I told you I didn't know, Chloe said, keeping her chin up. She refused to cower. He cheated on me. I wanted him to see me with someone else. You were just... convenient. Convenient. Gabriel murmured, testing the word on his tongue. He turned his gaze back to the window. I have been called many things. Convenient is a first. The car glided to a stop. Chloe looked out the window. They were parked directly in front of her apartment building. She hadn't given him her address. A cold spike of genuine fear finally pierced through her bravado. He knew where she lived. He knew everything about her. Don't look so terrified, Gabriel said softly. If I wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't have made it into the car. The man with the ruined nose opened her door. The rain was still coming down, splashing onto the pavement. Chloe hesitated, looking back at Gabriel. He remained in the shadows of the car. Thank you for the ride, she said. Go inside, Chloe, he replied. Lock your door. She scrambled out, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She didn't look back as she ran up the steps, swiping her key fob with trembling hands. She made it into the lobby, into the elevator, and finally into her apartment. She slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt, the chain, and leaning her forehead against the cool wood. Her breathing was ragged. She was exhausted, heartbroken, and completely out of her depth. She walked into the living room and grabbed the television remote, turning it on just for the noise. She needed to drown out the silence. The local news was on. The anchor looked grave. The federal indictment against alleged organized crime syndicate leader Gabriel Moretti fell apart today after 2 key witnesses failed to appear for testimony. The U.S. Attorney's Office declined to comment, but sources say Moretti's hold on the city's port operations remains entirely unchallenged. A picture of the man she had just kissed flashed on the screen. He was walking out of a courthouse, surrounded by lawyers and men in grey suits. He looked untouchable. Chloe touched her fingers to her lips. She could still taste the scotch. She hadn't just used a stranger for revenge. She had essentially thrown a rock at a sleeping dragon. And as the rain hammered against her window, deep down, she knew the dragon was going to wake up. The alarm went off at 6, sounding like a dentist's drill in the quiet of Chloe's apartment. She didn't slap it away. She just lay there, staring at the popcorn ceiling, waiting for the adrenaline of the previous night to finally dissipate. It didn't. It sat heavy and cold in her stomach, right next to the realization that her life had irrevocably fractured. She rolled out of bed. Her knees popped. The apartment felt too big, too empty, and simultaneously suffocating. Derek's things were still here. His expensive espresso machine that took up half the counter. His perfectly curated collection of vintage architectural digests on the coffee table. His running shoes by the door. Looking at them didn't induce tears. It induced a wave of profound exhaustion. She had spent 2 years building a life around a man who viewed her as an accessory, a stepping stone to a respectable domestic image while he hunted for thrills in VIP booths. She showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing her skin raw, trying to wash away the smell of the bar, the rain, and the faint, lingering scent of peat and smoke. By 8:30, she was walking into the glass-walled lobby of her commercial real estate firm in the Loop. The routine usually brought her a sense of control. Today, every reflection in the glass made her flinch. She half expected to see men in grey suits standing by the elevators. Her boss, Richard, was pacing outside her office when she arrived. Richard was a man perpetually on the verge of a stress-induced ulcer, but today he looked like he had actively sprinted toward one. His tie was loose, and he was clutching a manila folder with white-knuckled intensity. "You're late," he said, not looking at his watch. He pushed into her office behind her, shutting the heavy glass door. "It's 8:32, Richard," Chloe said, dropping her bag onto her desk. She booted up her computer. "I had a rough night. Derek and I don't care about Derek," Richard interrupted. He slapped the folder onto her keyboard. "I care about the wire transfer that cleared our escrow account 20 minutes ago. A retainer. For you." Chloe froze. The mouse in her hand suddenly felt like a brick. "A retainer? From who? I haven't pitched any new clients this week." "A holding company. Frontline Logistics." Richard leaned over her desk, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Do you know who owns Frontline Logistics, Chloe?" "No," she lied. Her throat was bone dry. "Gabriel Moretti." Richard said the name like it was a live bomb. He took a step back, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. The Moretti family. Organized crime, Chloe. Extortion, racketeering, God knows what else. And his people just wired $250,000 to secure your exclusive brokerage services for the next 6 months. Chloe stared at the folder. She didn't open it. The numbers on the screen behind it blurred. "I can't take it," she said flatly. "You don't have a choice, and neither do I," Richard hissed, pacing the small perimeter of the room. "You don't send $250,000 back to Gabriel Moretti and say, 'No, thank you, we're fully booked.' The man owns half the docks in the city. He owns the concrete companies we use to build our high-rises. If we reject this, we're dead in the water. Maybe literally." "Richard, breathe." "Don't tell me to breathe. Why did he ask for you, specifically you? The mandate was crystal clear. Chloe Davis, or the deal is off, and the firm faces complications." Chloe looked out the window down at the busy Chicago street. It was overcast again. "I bumped into him last night. At a bar. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Richard repeated, his voice cracking. "You bumped into the head of the Cosa Nostra, and his response was to buy your entire professional calendar, apparently. Well, you are meeting him at 10. Richard pointed a trembling finger at the folder. "The address is in there. It's an industrial park down in the South Loop. Go down there, nod your head, smile, and do whatever real estate magic you do. Just keep him happy, Chloe. Keep him far away from the rest of this firm." Richard practically fled the room. Chloe sat in the silence for a long time. She opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. An address. Nothing else. No contact name. No property details. She picked up her phone. She had 4 missed calls from Derek. 5 text messages, all variations of "We need to talk," and "You're making a huge mistake." She blocked the number. She stood up, smoothed down the skirt of her charcoal suit, and grabbed her trench coat. The cynical voice in her head was screaming to run, to pack a bag and take a train to nowhere. But the pragmatic side, the side that had clawed her way up from a trailer park in Ohio to a corner office in Chicago, knew you didn't run from a man who could find you before you even bought the ticket. You met him head-on, and you negotiated. Downstairs, the morning rush hour was in full swing. Cabs honked, bike messengers wove through traffic, and pedestrians marched with heads down against the wind. A black Lincoln Navigator sat idling at the curb, exactly where the loading zone ended. A man stepped out of the driver's side. It was the man with the ruined nose from the bar. In the daylight, he looked even more imposing. His suit was immaculate, but it couldn't hide the dense, coiled muscle underneath. He didn't smile. He just opened the rear door and stood waiting. Chloe didn't hesitate. She walked across the pavement and climbed in. The drive was agonizingly silent. The partition was up. Chloe watched the glittering skyscrapers of the Loop give way to the grimmier, older architecture of the South Side. Brick warehouses, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, and the heavy metallic skeletons of train overpasses dominated the landscape. The SUV pulled into an expansive, cracked asphalt lot surrounding a massive, dilapidated warehouse. The building looked abandoned, its windows opaque with decades of grime. The vehicle stopped. The driver opened her door. "Inside," he grunted, pointing toward a heavy steel side door. Chloe stepped out. The wind off the lake whipped her hair across her face. She clutched her briefcase to her chest like a shield and walked toward the entrance. She pulled the door open. Its rusted hinges screamed in protest. The interior was cavernous, a vast, echoing expanse of concrete and steel pillars. The air smelled of dust, old motor oil, and damp concrete. Shafts of grey light filtered through the skylights, illuminating dancing motes of dust. Gabriel Moretti stood in the center of the space. He was wearing a long black wool overcoat over a dark suit, his hands buried in his pockets. He was looking up at the exposed rafters, entirely still. Two other men stood in the shadows near the perimeter, blending into the darkness. Chloe's heels clicked loudly on the concrete. The sound echoed, announcing her arrival, but Gabriel didn't turn until she was 20 feet away. In the stark daylight, the harsh angles of his face were unforgiving. He looked like a man carved from granite, permanent, immovable, and cold. "You're 5 minutes late," he said. His voice carried effortlessly across the vast space, a low, resonant baritone. "Traffic," Chloe lied smoothly. She stopped 10 feet from him. "And I don't recall agreeing to a meeting." "You accepted the retainer. My boss accepted the retainer because he thought you were going to put him in cement shoes if he didn't." A muscle feathered in Gabriel's jaw. It was the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "Richard is a coward, but he is a pragmatic coward. I appreciate pragmatism." "What do you want, Mr. Moretti?" Chloe asked, dropping her briefcase onto a rusted oil drum. She popped the latches. "I'm a commercial broker. You don't need a broker. You own the title company, the zoning board, and half the unions in the city. So why am I here?" Gabriel took a slow step towards her. The air in the room seemed to compress, growing heavier as he closed the distance. "Derek's firm has been quietly, aggressively acquiring properties in this grid for 2 years, Gabriel said, stopping just a few feet away. "They want to level this entire block and build luxury lofts, a $1 billion development. They need this specific warehouse to complete the parcel. It sits dead center in their proposed blueprint." "I know," Chloe said. "I read the prospectus. They have been sending aggressive, insulting lowball offers to a holding company they think belongs to a bankrupt steel magnate." Gabrielle looked around the empty room. "They don't know it belongs to me." Chloe crossed her arms. And as of this morning, you are my sole representative for this property. You are going to manage the sale to your ex-fiancé's firm." Chloe stared at him. The sheer vindictive brilliance of it hit her a second later. "You want me to negotiate with Derek?" "I want you to bleed him," Gabriel corrected softly. "I want you to sit across a conference table from the man who embarrassed you, representing a ghost he desperately needs, and I want you to extract a number so high it destroys his profit margin and ruins his standing with his board. You are going to force him to overpay by 50%, and he is going to have to smile while he signs the check." Chloe's breath hitched. It was a perfect, bloodless execution. It would destroy Derek's career. It was exactly the kind of revenge she had craved for a fleeting second in the bar. But looking at Gabriel, she realized this wasn't a favor. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "You don't care about my broken engagement. You don't care about Derek. You could squash him like a bug. Why make this a game? Why involve me?" Gabriel looked down at her. His flat, dark eyes were unreadable. "Because you walked up to me in a crowded room and used me." The words were spoken without anger, but they carried a terrifying weight. "I didn't know who you were," she'd repeated. "It doesn't matter." Gabriel stepped closer. She could smell the scotch and the cold wind on his coat. "People do not use me, Chloe. People do not touch me without permission. People do not cross my boundaries and walk away." She held her ground, refusing to step back, though every instinct screamed at her to retreat. "So this is punishment?" "This is restitution," he corrected. He reached out. Chloe stiffened, but she didn't pull away. He didn't strike. Instead, his gloved hand brushed a stray lock of hair away from her face, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was agonizingly gentle, entirely at odds with the violent threat of his presence. "You owed me a debt the second you kissed me," he murmured, his thumb brushing against her jawline. "You are going to pay it by doing exactly what you do best. You are going to sell this building, and you are going to take a standard 3% commission so the IRS doesn't blink." His hand dropped. The sudden absence of his touch felt colder than the warehouse air. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. Gabriel turned away, walking slowly toward the large loading bay doors. "You won't, because despite the fact that you are terrified right now, you are also incredibly angry, and I am handing you a loaded gun. All you have to do is pull the trigger." He stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "Bring the drafted contracts to my restaurant at 8 tonight. We will discuss your strategy." "Your restaurant. Leah will pick you up," he said, gesturing vaguely to the man with the ruined nose. "Do not be late again, Chloe." He walked out a side door, vanishing into the shadows of the industrial park. Chloe stood alone in the massive warehouse. Her hands were shaking again. She looked down at her briefcase. He was right. She was terrified. But as she pulled out a legal pad and began calculating the square footage and zoning variances, she realized he was right about the other thing too. She was going to pull the trigger. The restaurant was in Little Italy, tucked away on a side street devoid of foot traffic. There was no sign above the door, just a heavy wrought-iron lantern casting a warm, amber glow against the brick. Leo held the door open. Chloe stepped inside. The atmosphere was an immediate shock to the system. It was warm, smelling intensely of roasting garlic, rich tomato, and expensive wine. The lighting was low, the music a soft, melancholic opera playing from unseen speakers. But the most jarring detail was the emptiness. It was 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, and the restaurant was completely deserted, save for one table in the back corner. Gabriel sat there, a bottle of Barolo already breathing on the white tablecloth. He had shed the overcoat, but still wore the dark suit. He looked up as she approached. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Chloe sat. She placed her briefcase on the floor beside her. She felt absurdly out of place. Her corporate armor, the charcoal suit, the sensible heels, felt flimsy in a room built for secrets and hushed conversations. An older man in a pristine white apron materialized from the kitchen. He didn't ask for their order. He simply set down 2 plates of burrata and prosciutto, poured a glass of wine for Chloe, and vanished without a word. He hadn't made eye contact with Gabriel once. "You bought out the entire restaurant?" Chloe asked, taking a sip of the wine. It was heavy, complex, and tasted like money. I own the restaurant. Gabriel corrected. I merely told them to lock the doors. Right. Silly me. I keep forgetting you own the city. Gabriel picked up his fork. The paperwork. Chloe reached down, grabbed a sleek black folder from her briefcase, and slid it across the table. The property is zoned for heavy industrial, but the City Council passed a variance amendment last month for residential conversion in that specific grid. Derek's firm lobbied for it, hard. Gabriel opened the folder. He read quickly, his eyes scanning the documents with sharp precision. You priced it at 42 million. The market value is 25, Chloe said, cutting into her food. 42 is extortion. It will force them to liquidate assets from their Northside portfolio just to cover the down payment. It will cripple their quarterly liquidity. But they will pay it. They have to. They've already sunk 10 million into architectural plans and permits that are useless without your parcel of land. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. But Derek isn't an idiot. He's a snake, but he understands numbers. When he sees the holding company, he's going to dig. He'll want to know who is squeezing him. Gabriel closed the folder. Let him dig. If he digs deep enough, he will find a maze of offshore accounts that lead nowhere. All he will see is you, Chloe. You are the face of his ruin. He looked at her over the rim of his wine glass. How does that feel? Cold, Chloe admitted honestly. And deeply satisfying. Gabriel set his glass down. He watched her for a long moment. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with an unspoken appraisal. Why did you stay with him? Gabriel asked. The question was abrupt, slicing through the business talk. Chloe stiffened. I don't think my personal life is part of the retainer. Everything about you is part of the retainer. Gabriel countered smoothly. If I am going to trust you to execute this, I need to know how you think. You are intelligent. You are ruthless when provoked. So why tie yourself to a mediocre man who couldn't keep his hands to himself? Chloe looked down at her plate. The cynical defense mechanism flared, urging her to tell him to go to hell. But looking at the man across from her, a man who lived entirely in the brutal reality of the world, she knew a lie wouldn't work. Because he was safe. She said quietly. Or at least I thought he was. He had a 401k. He talked about mortgages and summer houses. I grew up in a place where people didn't know how they were paying rent on Tuesday. Derek was a blueprint for a life I thought I was supposed to want. She looked up, meeting his flat, dark eyes. It was a business transaction. I gave him the perfect corporate wife aesthetic. He gave me stability. I just didn't read the fine print. Gabriel didn't mock her. He didn't offer pity. He simply nodded, absorbing the information. Stability is an illusion, Gabriel said softly. Control is the only reality. You relinquished your control to him. That was your mistake. And now I'm relinquishing it to you. No. Gabriel leaned forward slightly. The proximity made her breath hitch. You are executing a contract. You are maintaining your agency. If you were truly under my control, Chloe, you would not be sitting across from me arguing about market value. Then what am I doing? You are surviving, he said. The kitchen doors swung open again. The older man brought out 2 plates of veal saltimbocca. The smell of sage and brown butter filled the space between them. They ate in silence for a while. The tension in Chloe's shoulders began to ease, marginally. The sheer surrealism of eating a Michelin-quality meal with a mob boss was overriding her fear. Derek called me, Chloe said, breaking the quiet. 4 times today. Gabriel stopped chewing. He placed his knife and fork down deliberately. Did you answer? No, I blocked the number. Good. Gabriel reached across the table. He didn't ask for permission. He took her hand, the one resting beside her wine glass. His skin was warm, his palms calloused. It was a worker's hand attached to a billionaire's suit. He turned her hand over, tracing the faint red mark on her ring finger where Derek's diamond used to sit. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't pull away. She was mesmerized by the dark, intense focus in his eyes. "He will try to find you," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur. "When the initial shock wears off, his ego will demand closure. He will show up at your office or your apartment." "I can handle Derek." Gabriel's thumb pressed lightly against her pulse point on her wrist. It was racing. "You won't have to. The moment you walked into my car last night, a boundary was drawn around you. The moment you accepted this contract today, that boundary became permanent." He looked up from her wrist, locking his eyes with hers. The coldness was gone, replaced by a fierce, territorial heat that terrified her more than his violence ever could. "You are no longer an independent variable, Chloe," Gabriel stated, his voice a low, absolute promise. "You belong to this deal, you belong to the firm, and by extension you are under my protection." He released her hand. The cold air rushed back to her skin. "Understand this," Gabriel continued, leaning back in his chair. "In my world, my protection is an absolute deterrent, but it also means that your enemies are no longer just arrogant corporate boys. When people look at you now, they will see my shadow. And there are men in this city who hate me far more than Derek Vance hates you." Chloe swallowed hard. The wine suddenly tasted like ash. She had thought she was getting a quick, sharp revenge. She hadn't realized she was stepping into a war zone. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Gabriel smiled, a cold, sharp expression that held absolutely no joy. "Eat your veal, Chloe. We have a lot of work to do." The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Derek's firm smelled like ozone, dry erase markers, and aggressive ambition. It was a sterile, glass-walled box suspended above the Chicago skyline. Chloe sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. She wore a tailored navy suit that felt like armor, her hair pulled back into a severe twist. She didn't touch the complimentary sparkling water in front of her. Across from her sat 4 men. 3 were senior partners, older men with expensive haircuts and expressions of permanent impatience. The 4th was Derek. When Chloe had walked into the room 10 minutes earlier, Derek had actually dropped his Mont Blanc pen. It had clattered loudly against the wood. He had spent the first 5 minutes staring at her in a state of suspended shock, his jaw tight, his eyes darting frantically between her and the senior partners. He clearly hadn't told them about the incident at the Cobalt Room. He hadn't told them his ex-fiancée was the broker holding the keys to their billion-dollar development. Arthur, the managing partner, checked his gold Rolex. "Ms. Davis, we appreciate you taking the time. We've been trying to get a dialogue going with Frontline Logistics for weeks. To be frank, we were surprised to see a third-party broker step in, but we are eager to close this chapter. Frontline Logistics prefers to remain insulated from direct negotiations," Chloe said. Her voice was steady, devoid of any inflection. She sounded exactly like Gabriel. The realization sent a strange, cold thrill through her. "Understood," Arthur said, steepling his fingers. "Let's not waste time. We offered $28 million for the South Loop warehouse. That is a generous premium over market value. We have the contracts drafted." Chloe opened her leather portfolio. She didn't look at Derek. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the polished mahogany. It came to rest perfectly in the center of the table. "Frontline Logistics is declining the $28 million," Chloe said quietly. "The counteroffer is $42 million, non-negotiable. And my client requires a 30% earnest money deposit wired into escrow by close of business tomorrow." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum. Arthur stared at the paper as if it had spontaneously caught fire. The other two partners leaned in, their brows furrowing in unison. Derek finally found his voice. It was an octave higher than normal. 42? That's extortion. That's almost double the assessed value. He slammed a hand on the table, glaring at Chloe. What is this, Chloe? Is this some kind of joke? Arthur shot Derek a sharp, warning look before turning his attention back to Chloe. Ms. Davis, with all due respect, your client is overplaying their hand. The zoning variance your firm aggressively lobbied the city council for. Chloe interrupted, her tone polite, but razor-sharp. Yes, my client is aware of it. My client is also aware that you have already secured municipal bonds and pre-sold 40% of the unbuilt luxury units. You have committed to a construction timeline that begins in 60 days. She leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on the table. She looked directly at Arthur, bypassing Derek entirely. Without this warehouse, your parcel is incomplete. She continued, laying out the facts with clinical precision. You cannot build the foundational parking structure. You cannot meet the city's density requirements. The entire project stalls. Your investors pull out. You lose the municipal bonds. 42 million is not extortion, Arthur. It is the exact price of your firm's survival. Arthur's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He looked at the paper again. He knew she was right. They had over-leveraged themselves, assuming the warehouse owner was a desperate, bankrupt ghost. This is absurd, Derek hissed, standing up. He pointed a finger at Chloe. Arthur, don't listen to her. This is personal. She's doing this to get back at me. Arthur frowned, looking between Derek and Chloe. Personal? What are you talking about, Derek? Chloe didn't flinch. She met Derek's furious gaze with a look of absolute, chilling indifference. I assure you, Arthur, my client does not know who Derek is, nor do they care. This is a mathematical calculation based on your public filings. The offer stands for 24 hours. After that, my client will convert the warehouse into a specialized cold storage facility, and it will be off the market permanently. She stood up, closing her portfolio. The click of the brass latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I will await your call, she said. She turned and walked out of the glass-walled room. She didn't look back. Her legs felt slightly numb, adrenaline pumping through her veins like battery acid. She made it to the elevator bay and pressed the down button. Chloe! She turned. Derek was marching down the carpeted hallway, his face twisted in ugly, unrestrained anger. He had left the partners behind. You think you're smart, he snarled, stopping a foot away from her. He looked around the empty elevator lobby. You think you can come in here and bankrupt my project because you're throwing a tantrum over Sarah? It's not your project, Derek, Chloe said softly. You're just a mid-level manager who didn't do his due diligence. And it's not a tantrum, it's $42 million. Derek lunged forward, grabbing her upper arm. His grip was painfully tight. You're going to go back in there and tell them you made a mistake. You're going to fix this, or I swear to God— A shadow detached itself from the alcove near the restrooms. Leo didn't run. He just appeared. He moved with that same terrifying, fluid grace Gabriel possessed. Before Derek could finish his threat, Leo's massive hand clamped down on Derek's wrist. Leo didn't say a word. He just squeezed. Derek let out a sharp, breathless yelp. His knees buckled slightly as the bones in his wrist ground together under the immense pressure. He released Chloe's arm instantly, his face draining of all color. Do not touch her, Leo growled. The ruined architecture of his face made the threat look like a promise of imminent death. Mr. Moretti was very clear. Derek scrambled backward the second Leo let go, cradling his wrist against his chest. He looked at Leo, then at Chloe, raw terror finally eclipsing his arrogance. He realized in that moment that the man in the bar hadn't been a random encounter. The elevator chimed and the doors slid open. "Goodbye, Derek," Chloe said. She stepped into the car. Leo followed, standing between her and the doors as they slid shut, cutting off the sight of Derek trembling in the hallway. The descent was silent. Chloe looked at her arm. A faint red mark was already blooming on her skin. She felt a sickening mix of triumph and horror. She had won. She had absolutely decimated the man who broke her heart. But as she looked at Leo's impassive, scarred face reflected in the elevator doors, the reality of her situation settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She had traded a cheating fiancé for a monster, and the monster was now protecting her. 3 days later, the wire transfer hit. $42 million settled into Frontline Logistics accounts. An hour later, Chloe's firm received a staggering commission check. Richard, her boss, nearly wept in her office, babbling about bonuses and making her a junior partner. Chloe felt nothing. The victory was hollow. The revenge had been executed flawlessly, but it left her standing in a void. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Gabriel's dark, unreadable gaze across that empty restaurant table. She felt the heavy, calloused warmth of his hand on hers. It was a Tuesday evening. The Chicago wind was howling off the lake, driving a freezing, relentless rain against the pavement. Chloe was leaving a high-end grocery store in the Gold Coast, clutching a paper bag containing a bottle of wine she didn't want and ingredients for a dinner she wouldn't eat. She walked quickly toward her car, parked half a block away under the flickering amber light of a broken street lamp. The street was largely empty, the weather keeping the usual foot traffic indoors. She pressed the unlock button on her key fob. The headlights of her Audi flashed. As she reached for the handle, a dark grey Lincoln sedan pulled sharply to the curb, boxing her in. Its tires screeched against the wet asphalt. Chloe froze. The rational part of her brain said it was just an aggressive driver looking for a spot. The primal, newly awakened instincts in her gut screamed otherwise. The rear door of the Lincoln opened before the car had even fully stopped. 2 men stepped out into the rain. They weren't wearing the sharp, tailored suits of Gabriel's men. They wore heavy leather jackets and baseball caps pulled low. "Chloe Davis," the taller one said. He didn't ask. He confirmed. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. In his right hand, the street lamp caught the dull, heavy gleam of a suppressed pistol. The paper grocery bag slipped from Chloe's numb fingers. The wine bottle shattered against the pavement, mixing red liquid with the dirty rain. She didn't scream. Her throat seized completely. She took a step back, hitting the cold metal of her own car door. "Get in the car," the man said. He raised the gun, pointing it squarely at her chest. Now, everything slowed down. The raindrops seemed to hang in the air. The sound of the wind faded into a dull roar. Gabriel's words echoed in her mind. "When people look at you now, they will see my shadow. And there are men in this city who hate me far more than Derek hates you." These were the men. A rival faction. A message meant for the Cosa Nostra boss, delivered through the woman who had suddenly, inexplicably, become his proxy. "I don't," Chloe started, her voice a reedy whisper. Before the man with the gun could take another step, the street exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was a black SUV that seemed to materialize out of the rain, accelerating with terrifying speed and slamming head-on into the side of the grey Lincoln. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass was deafening. The impact threw the 2 men to the ground. Before they could recover, the doors of the SUV flew open. 4 men poured out. They moved with a terrifying synchronized brutality. Chloe recognized Leo. He didn't have a gun drawn. He simply walked up to the man who had pointed the weapon at Chloe, grabbed him by the front of his leather jacket, and slammed his head against the concrete retaining wall of a nearby planter. The sickening crack echoed over the sound of the rain. The man went limp instantly, sliding to the wet pavement. The other 3 men systematically dismantled the second attacker and the driver of the Lincoln, a flurry of precise, bone-breaking strikes that ended the confrontation in less than 15 seconds. It was violence stripped of any cinematic glamour. It was fast, ugly, and devastatingly efficient. Chloe stood frozen, her back pressed against her car, hyperventilating. The shattered glass of the Lincoln littered the street. The rear door of the black SUV opened slowly. Gabriel stepped out. He didn't look at the unconscious men on the ground. He didn't look at his own crew, who were already dragging the bodies into the back of the ruined Lincoln. He looked only at Chloe. He wore no overcoat, just a dark suit that immediately began to soak through in the heavy rain. His face was a mask of cold, uncompromising fury. It was a terrifying thing to witness. The carefully constructed restraint he usually carried was gone, revealing the sheer, predatory nature of what he actually was. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt?" His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the storm like a blade. Chloe shook her head. She couldn't speak. Her teeth were chattering, her entire body shaking uncontrollably from the adrenaline dump. Gabriel didn't ask another question. He didn't wait for her to regain her composure. He reached out, sliding one arm around her waist and the other under her knees. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her away from the blood and the broken glass, away from her shattered groceries. He placed her in the back of his SUV. The heat inside blasted against her freezing skin. He slid in beside her, slamming the door shut. The partition to the driver was already up. The SUV peeled away from the curb, leaving Leo and the cleanup crew behind in the rain. Chloe curled her knees to her chest, pressing herself into the far corner of the leather seat. She stared at Gabriel. His jaw was locked tight, a muscle ticking violently near his temple. He was staring straight ahead, breathing heavily. "I told you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I told you I was just a broker. I didn't want this." Gabriel turned his head slowly. The fury in his eyes was blinding. "They were O'Bannon's men. They have been trying to breach my ports for a year. They thought taking you would give them leverage." "Because of you!" Chloe shouted, the terror suddenly crystallizing into rage. "They targeted me because of you. You drew a boundary around me, Gabriel, and it made me a target." "It kept you alive!" He fired back, his voice finally rising, filling the small space of the car with a booming authority. "If I hadn't put a detail on you, you would be dead in a warehouse on the south side right now. They would have tortured you just to send me a message." The blunt, brutal truth of the words hit her like a physical blow. She covered her face with her trembling hands, a choked, dry sob escaping her throat. She wasn't crying. It was just the sound of her reality fracturing completely. The SUV didn't head toward her apartment. It bypassed the loop entirely, heading north, toward the Gold Coast, toward the towering, monolithic high-rises that guarded the lakefront. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice muffled behind her hands. "My home," Gabriel said. The anger in his voice had receded, replaced by a cold, heavy finality. "You cannot go back to your apartment. Not tonight. Not ever." Chloe dropped her hands. "You can't just dictate my life. I have a job. You have a target on your back." He interrupted. He reached across the seat. He grabbed her wrists, pulling her hands away from her body, forcing her to look at him. His grip was tight, bordering on painful, but she didn't struggle. "Listen to me," Gabriel said, his dark eyes boring into hers. "The rules have changed. The negotiation is over. You are not going back to the life you had. That life died the moment you kissed me in that bar. You are mine to protect now, Chloe, and I do not fail." Gabriel's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a brutalist glass and steel tower overlooking Lake Michigan. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress suspended in the clouds. The interior was vast, cold, and meticulously designed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the storm raging over the black water, lightning illuminating the sky in jagged, silver bursts. The private elevator opened directly into the living space. Gabriel let go of her wrists as soon as the doors parted. He walked straight to a massive, custom-built marble bar, pulling a decanter of scotch and pouring 2 heavy glasses. Chloe stood in the center of the room. Her navy suit was soaked through, the wool heavy and clinging to her skin. She was shivering, but the cold was internal. The adrenaline had finally burned out, leaving a hollow, aching void in her chest. She looked around the penthouse. There were no photographs, no books, no signs of life. It looked like a luxury hotel suite waiting for an occupant who would never arrive. Gabriel walked back to her, pressing a glass of scotch into her hand. "Drink it," he commanded. Chloe took a sip. The alcohol burned its way down her throat, settling as a warm knot in her stomach. It grounded her, just a fraction. Gabriel set his own glass down on a glass coffee table without tasting it. He ran a hand through his damp, dark hair. For the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely rattled. The absolute control he projected had cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but it was enough to show the churning violence beneath. "I underestimated O'Bannon's desperation," Gabriel said quietly, staring out at the storm. I thought taking the South Loop property would force him to regroup. I was wrong. I put you in the crossfire." "Stop," Chloe said. She walked over to the coffee table and set her glass down next to his. She didn't want the alcohol. She wanted clarity. Gabriel turned to face her. "Stop talking about me like I'm a piece of real estate you mismanaged," she said, her voice steadying. The rage was back, cold and sharp. "I am not a parcel of land. I am not a pawn. I never said you were. You said I was yours to protect." Chloe stepped closer to him. She tipped her head back to meet his gaze. She was exhausted, terrified, and pushed entirely past the point of self-preservation. "You said my life is over. You dragged me into this." "You dragged yourself into this?" Gabriel countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. He didn't step back. He met her advance, the space between them evaporating. "You walked up to a stranger and started a fire you didn't know how to put out. So put it out," she challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know what she was doing. It was madness. He was the head of a crime syndicate. He had just orchestrated the brutal beating of 3 men in front of her. But standing there, surrounded by the cold luxury of his fortress, the only thing she felt was the gravitational pull of his presence. He was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned liquid. Gabriel's eyes darkened, the flat brown turning to pitch black. The tension in the room spiked, thick and suffocating. He didn't speak. He reached out, threading his large, calloused hands into her damp hair, gripping the back of her head. The touch wasn't gentle. It was possessive, demanding, and exactly what she had felt in the bar that first night. He kissed her. It wasn't a performance this time. There was no audience, no ex-fiancé to humiliate. It was raw, bruising, and heavy with adrenaline. Chloe gasped against his mouth, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of his wet suit jacket. Gabriel backed her up, his heavy steps forcing her retreat until her back hit the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. The storm raged against the glass behind her, but the heat radiating from the man pinning her in place was far more intense. He broke the kiss, dragging his mouth down her jaw, his lips pressing against the frantic pulse at her neck. Chloe let out a shuddering breath, her fingers curling into the wool of his suit. "You don't want the fire put out," Gabriel murmured against her skin, his voice a dark rumble that vibrated through her chest. "You want it to burn," Gabriel, she breathed, the name tasting like smoke on her tongue. He pulled back just enough to look at her. The mask was completely gone. He looked at her with a fierce, territorial hunger that stripped away every corporate defense mechanism she had ever built. "There is no going back, Chloe," he said softly, his thumb tracing the line of her bottom lip. "If we do this, if you stay here tonight, the boundary is sealed. You step into my world completely. You accept the violence, you accept the shadow." He was giving her an out. A single, fleeting chance to ask for a driver, to go to a hotel, to run away and hide under an assumed name. Chloe looked into the eyes of the man who had destroyed her ex, who had saved her life, and who was now offering her the most terrifying, intoxicating stability she had ever known. She thought of Derek and his pathetic, performative life. She thought of the hollow victory of the boardroom. She didn't want safe anymore. Safe was an illusion. She reached up, her hands framing his harsh, shadowed face. "I don't run," she whispered. She pulled him down, kissing him again, sealing the contract. She wasn't just the broker anymore, she was his. And as Gabriel swept her up into his arms, carrying her away from the storm and into the dark expanse of the penthouse, Chloe knew she had finally found the bottom of the rabbit hole. It was terrifying, it was violent, and for the first time in her life, it felt exactly like home. Chloe thought she was playing a game of corporate chess, but she ended up pawning her soul to the king of Chicago's underworld. Gabriel Moretti doesn't do half measures, and tonight, he proved that his protection comes with a price tag that money can't cover. If you were holding your breath during that street ambush, you know this story is far from over. What happens when the O'Bannon Syndicate strikes back? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the explosive next chapter. Drop a comment below. Did Chloe make the right choice staying with Gabriel, or is she in too deep? Share this with a friend who loves a dark romance, and we'll see you in the next video.